Alright friends, I'm back to do another video on this transit of 2025 for the month of March. Oh my goodness, this is the week. The game has begun. And we're going to talk about the lunar eclipse in the sign of Virgo today. So this is the second eclipse on this axis. The first one happened in September, and that was a solar eclipse in the sign of Virgo. And now we're having the lunar eclipse. So in this video, I'll be talking about what does all of this mean, and I'm going to also talk about some of the aspects that are being made to this eclipse. But before starting, if you like the content of this video or what's on this channel, please like, subscribe, and comment. Especially comment, as I always say, because they're very valuable to me. It allows me to see how these archetypes, symbols, astrology in general is unfolding in people's lives on ground zero of experience. This is very important to understand the nuances of how these symbols manifest themselves. So if you leave a comment, I greatly appreciate it. And if you're interested in my services, such as chart reading, archetypal life narrative counseling, as well as my courses, go to parisayazi.com or go to the About section on YouTube, and all the links are there also. And lastly, if you like to fast forward, go back and forth, this video is timestamped, so you can do that as well. And without further ado, let us begin. So this lunar eclipse will occur on March 14th of 2025, and it is a day after where Sun and Saturn perfect their conjunction in the sign of Pisces. Actually, Sun and Saturn meet at 21 degrees. They will maintain that conjunction to about 22 degrees, and then the eclipse is happening at 23 degrees of Virgo. And as I just mentioned, this is the second activation of this axis. The first one was on September 17th of 2024, and that one was a solar eclipse in the sign of Virgo. So like all eclipses, this too will be a moment of culmination and revelation. So this lunar eclipse, like all other eclipses, they are talking something about culmination, revelation, and then there comes a transformation from it. And we got to remember, if the nodes are not present with the two luminaries, the sun and the moon, we would, in this case of a lunar eclipse, we're just talking about a full moon. And full moons in general are talking about some kind of a culmination and a revelation. But when we get the nodes involved, then we have some sort of a karmic or a fated ramification. It's redirecting our trajectory in some aspect of our life. And which aspect is that? Look at where the sign of Virgo is sitting. Which house is it sitting in? So it's talking about the themes of that house, the people that pertains to that house. So this is one way of knowing, well, what are they touching? And one thing that is worth remembering, the nodes by themselves in their symbols and signification denote radical changes. They are about power dynamics. They're powerful themselves. So that radical notion of change of trajectory is coming from the presence of the nodes here being involved with this full moon. And the kind of transformation that they can bring sudden endings, but we know an ending is almost always necessary to have a new beginning. So that culmination aspect of it is denoting some conclusion to something, but at the same time is opening a portal to something else, something that's new. It's inaugurating something different. And as I was mentioning earlier, this is not a dry eclipse, because sometimes we have eclipses and there are really no aspects, but opposing this Virgo sign, we have Saturn and Sun conjunct. So it's bringing a sense of weight and accountability to this eclipse. And it's important to understand another thing about this whole notion of endings and new beginnings. It's almost as if the nodes bring closure through some sort of an exposure, so they reveal something, and then they have this tendency to release. And is that release that's opening up some new space for some new emergent properties to come forth. And we can connect this to the September 17th solar eclipse. We can also go back 6 months, where there was the last full moon in the sign of Virgo, which was on September 2nd of 2024. The moon was marking the culmination of some aspect of our life. So the stage has been set for something to give its fruits. It has come to its finality, its final stage. And this full moon right now is being intensified to the nth degree because Ketu South node is also sitting there. So the node here is saying that there's almost like a karmic checkpoint now. And because it's Ketu, what needs to be released must be released now. And the reason why this is happening, one way to interpret it is to say that what has culminated, what has given its fruit, no longer has a use, so it has to be released. And this could pertain to our desires, things we achieved or attainments, attachments, aspirations. They have to be released because they are no longer in alignment with what is necessary in the upcoming future. And with Rahu, it's a little bit easier to make the statement of you're going to have shifts and changes in your external environment, because Rahu represents external aspects of life, is the externalization process in general, while Ketu is the opposite, is about internalization process. So sometimes with this Ketu's involvement, with the South Node's involvement, all of these massive shifts, like these tectonic plates that are moving, they're more internal than external. But usually it is our interiority that has to change before we can externalize its action out in the world. And it's kind of ironic that the last eclipse that's going to happen in that axis of Aries and Libra, the solar eclipse is going to be in the sign of Aries. So it's almost like there's that emotional, mental, spiritual churning of the inner ocean where we find the application or what we have to do, maybe what even we're forced to do in the sign of Aries when that eclipse happens at the end of March. Like with Ketu, we can have a very intense internal realization suddenly where your world is shook. The things that used to give you a sense of meaning, obliterated. You can't hold on to it anymore. It's almost as if the old ways of thinking, feeling, they just have to be released. So that internal shift eventually creates an outer world kind of a dynamic. And because the nodes in general accelerate the transformative process or the process of transformation, we can have a change of mind about something. Emotions completely turn over. So in some ways, considering that we're talking about Ketu South Node, which is very internal and introverted, we're having some massive internal shifts and changes. And when we look at the placement of the nodes in the sign of Virgo and Pisces, we got to kind of, and we always have to treat this as an axis, right? Because these two planets, the nodes are always 180 degrees away from each other. So when we come into the sign of Virgo versus the sign of Pisces, we're talking about the tangible versus the intangible, the methodical and the rational, which is Virgo, versus the boundless depth of our imagination. It's almost as if there's an interplay now between the structured and the form and the formless, or between precision and abstraction, or between practical reality and lofty ideals and ideas. So that earthiness of Virgo is very practical, and that dual water nature of Pisces, it can be idealistic, it can be imaginative, it doesn't have to be grounded in reality. And these are tension points, right? I mean, how do you negotiate between practical application of something and then just sitting on your couch and trying to imagine what the outcome of it will be, how you will enjoy it, what it looks like? So there's a tension point here, right? So we have to be able to reconcile this tension point. And these themes all got activated during that first solar eclipse in Virgo, which was on September 17 of 2024. And this axis, these tension points are going to be activated for quite a while. In fact, this eclipse, the eclipses that are getting activated is a little bit longer than usual, because we're going to have the eclipses on this axis until February of 2027. So it's like 2.5 years. It's making a longer eclipse cycle in general. So this tension point between dissolution and order, the solution being Pisces and trying to categorize things and order things, which is Virgo, is very much present. Or trying to have transcendence and trying to think abstractly and be spiritual rather than paradigmatic, realistic daily tasks and routines that we have to do. It's almost, you can say that is the battle of theory versus practice. But since we're going to have this eclipse in Virgo, let's examine some of the themes that can come up and what it is that Virgo represents, because this is very important to be able to interpret what are these eclipses about in general. So for the next 2.5 years, we're going to be grappling with a lot of Virgo themes, which has a lot to do with discernment, understanding, having precision. Virgo is about methodical, detailed work. It's a very detail-oriented sign. It's Mercury's sign, right? So that planet of intellect wants problems, is a problem solver. and it wants to differentiate things all the times. And this is a sign where it's also exalted. So, and Mercury is exalted here because the sign of Virgo accommodates what Mercury does, right? So we can see that detailed aspect of Virgo. And Virgo is also an earth sign. So it is pertaining to earthly matters, which can be practical, tangible. So we can see in the sign of Virgo, we're generally grappling with problem solving issues, and it's about utilizing our ability to organize things. It's like doing math. You have to do the equation step by step, showing how you are arriving to your conclusion. You have to be methodical in that sense. This is like the sign of Virgo. And then there's another aspect of Virgo too that is related to purification and also healing. And it's not like a mystical kind of healing. It's healing abilities are coming from its power of discernment. And it's that which allows diagnosis. And if you know what kind of thing you're dealing with because you've been able to diagnose it, that's half of the equation, right? Now you just got to figure out what are the remedies for this problem. And also when you know how to diagnose something, you can also know what caused it. So you have a very good neck to know what's harmful and what has been corrupted in the system to be able to find a remedy for it. So the healing process that comes out of Virgo is looking at a mind that's very methodical in understanding things. There is a meticulous attention to details. So this also tells us that the sign of Virgo is related to careful observation. It's able to do a lot of analysis. And through this, it understands what needs to be corrected and how something can be restored. It will also know how things can be refined and made better. So it's through this that Virgo becomes a healer when it's related to our health, our physical, tangible bodies, and generally anything that has a structure to it and can be systematically observed and understood. Virgo can come to fix it or to heal it. So this isn't healing through intuition or because I just have a gut feeling about something. This is a very intelligent sign in that way. It's about understanding procedures and how to implement procedures. And then when we look at Virgo in terms of purification, usually water and fire are related to purification. When we think about it, it's like, how is an earth sign related to purification? We can see that the sign of Virgo, because of that inherent intelligence that's there, which is also saying something about why Mercury is its ruler. Its purification is coming through its ability to categorize and to organize. And when we do that, when we have the ability to do that, we know how to filter out unnecessary things where things don't belong with something else. It's usually that when we don't have that power of discernment, we create clutter where that clutter then needs some sort of a purification. So Virgo knows how to purge the excess of something and how to keep it at a state that's clear and efficient. So refinement is the way that Virgo comes to purify. Like for Virgo people too, if something doesn't have a purpose or a function, it's like, why is it sitting there? What's the point of that? That's what makes the sign of Virgo practical in a lot of ways. And it's not like rejecting for the sake of rejection. And it's not like indiscriminate attempts to just rid itself of all imperfections, because the sign of Virgo has this bad rep for being a perfectionist and not in a nice way. Virgo is actually constantly working with the imperfect to refine it. And it's a process of refinement. It's not about I'm trying to reach a kind of a perfection. Because even if once you categorize things, then you can even simplify that and bring it down to its core, to the core of its element. So that's what the purification process is getting rid of the excess and the superfluous. And the ruler of Virgo, Mercury, has everything to do with balance. So by creating order, by having the kind of discernment that comes out of the sign of Virgo and the way things get balanced out, this is as close as one will get to perfection. Now, to tie this to the eclipses, we saw this in September too with the solar eclipse, because that tension point is still there, right? And it's happening in the sign of Virgo. Something started not to make sense in the way that Virgo needs to make sense, order, and balance things. Some ways that used to be practical, we have come to discover it has lost its function and practicality since that first eclipse in September. So naturally, when we see that something's not working, and if we pay attention consciously or subconsciously, it's almost like our current situation is at conflict with our past choices. That first eclipse in September, it was almost showing us the discrepancy between reality and imagination, theory and practice, and how things were are for some reason not finding a proper application at this time of life. So we're setting this into stage for us to be able to see it and to recognize it. It's almost as if a new kind of a truth is being revealed to us at the moment. Now, what is this lunar eclipse about in March? Well, I would argue is about letting go of old practical applications. I mean, they were previously useful and they actually worked, but somehow, especially since the last eclipse, things are becoming a little bit nonsensical in terms of, okay, these were my old habits. These were my daily routines. This is how I conducted myself every day. There's a glitch in the system right now. Things are not working the way that they used to work. And I would argue this lunar eclipse is asking us to let go and to release the order of how things used to be for some new emergent realization, which can then inaugurate new ways of doing things and the actions that can go along with it. So we're looking for some kind of a resolution for a lot of conflicts in our daily life, which can be felt internally too, depending on where this Virgo sign is sitting in your chart, which house is it sitting in. It's just demanding some kind of a change. It's like we have built certain habits for the past 9 years and 3 months, which was the last time the nodes were here. We were trying to find applications when the nodes came to this axis the last time and activated this axis. So we were in the habit building process, especially since Rahu was in Virgo, right? So we were trying to create new ways of being and routines and habits. And that's what was getting cultivated and entrenched for the past 9 years. But now with Ketu being there, Ketu's like, yeah, those ones don't apply anymore. The rules do not apply to today. Those routines are useless for today. So it's about breaking habits. And it wants us to sever our ties to past ways of organizing, categories, understanding, observing, so that a new form of application and practice can come into its place. So this Ketu is very much activating that purification aspect of Virgo. The useless and the excess has to go. So this Virgo axis can also be showing us how the record has been scratched and is broken and is keep skipping and playing the same part of the song over and over. So it's exposing things that are broken and need fixing or just literally need to be released now. And we got to remember, since the moon here is conjunct Ketu South Node, I would argue it has less to do with fixing it and more to do with releasing it. Because no matter how we try to plug in the old formula into today, somehow it doesn't work. It doesn't get us anywhere. So it's time for that kind of a release or to do things different. And a lot of this releasing and surrender, because we're talking about the sign of Virgo, it has to do with our routines, our habits, the practical and tangible aspects of our life, and generally how we engage with daily life, how we do our problem solving, just moving through our day. And you know, it sounds mundane and you might be like, oh, I'd love to change my habits. What the hell? That's a great thing. Bring more eclipses, bring them on every week. But the thing is, our routines and our habits are our form of control. This is how we feel that we have some semblance of control and grip over our life. We just unconsciously move through these pathways of routines and habits where it is this that reduces the stress of life a lot of times. So if someone comes and breaks a routine that you really love, you feel like your day is out of your control suddenly. So this is not like a feel-good thing because you're forced to change your routines and habits. These are entrenched. These are the things that are now giving you meaning. These are the same things that on the other side of the axis in Pisces are triggering your imagination and the things that you feel that you want, and you fantasize about things that have become your ideals and values in the past 9 years. So it's not like this release is going to feel comfortable. It's going to have a lot of glitchy feelings in it, but it's necessary so that we can restructure the ways that we do things so that we can correspond to the emerging reality that's coming forth. And you know, Ketu has this effect where it's like some subconscious content that you have pushed to the background, they start surfacing. Like in the movies, when, I don't know, someone has been murdered and then the corpse starts to come on top of the water 5 years later, and then everyone's like, oh my God, this is what happened in that incident. Because for everything that we became conscious about, we do this all the time. For every time we choose something, we have to negate a million other things. We think we're free, we think we're choosing, but that very choice just limited us, put us in a very tight trajectory, and we're actually moving through eye of the needle. But because we made that choice, we have this feeling that we are free. And that process of negation, when we do choose, when we did choose 9 years ago, when Rahu was in the sign of Virgo, we negated many other things that we may have wanted. That's what was pushed into the subconscious. And Ra and Ketu, as a planet of interiority, is reaching deep within us and bringing these things out also. And you know, what comes out of the subconscious, it has to be incorporated into the conscious mind. And whatever that comes into the conscious mind, it's going to affect our actions. And we have to know then how to insert it back into our life through our daily practical actions and routines. And this process of reconfiguration and recalibration in reality is very difficult. Nonetheless, Ketu is creating some sort of a havoc right now to let us know that your old cycles and patterns non-applicable at the moment. Like the old problem solving methods, non-applicable. How you move through your day very unconsciously because you had these routines carved out and you just fall into it and kind of find yourself at the end of the day, non-applicable. There's actually a sense of consciousness right now about how we move through the day that is very uncomfortable. I know I'm feeling that. I feel like I'm walking through rose bushes full of thorns every day. Even though I'm doing the same thing, something's off. I can't exactly put my finger on it, but I can feel it. And this got triggered into place in September. So if we start to pay attention to what has happened since September, we'll start to understand some of the demands that are being put on us to bring certain things to their culmination because they are coming to their ending. So we can go willingly and consciously, or we'll just be dragged there painfully and screaming all along. And in this next section, I want to talk about some of the aspects being made to this lunar eclipse. I'm gonna pause for a second and I'll be right back. All right, you know, when you have like a catch-22 problem, this is what's happening right now. I really need coffee to wake the hell up. I'm halfway through this video and I'm still like, my mind is like working overtime. But then coffee dries out my voice. That's the catch-22. This is the catch-22. So do I get the energy and lose my voice and can't do this video? Or here you go. There's a practical choice that I had to make. I made it. Let's see what happens. Okay. So let's get back to the video. The aspects, intense. A lot of eclipses happen in isolation. So they're not really having aspects. There are no conjunctions, nothing of that nature. But there are a couple of crucial planetary aspects. One is the orb is a little bit loose, and the other one is at the exact same degree of this eclipse. So the two planets in the sign of Pisces opposing the eclipse, Sun and Saturn, are only about 1 degree apart at this point. So that's a very tight aspect. And then we go to the sign of Taurus, where Uranus is sitting at 23 degrees, and the eclipse is exactly at 23 degrees, and this is a sextile. And then we have Mars in Cancer. It's going to be about 5 degrees apart, 5.5 degrees, which is making it more of a loose kind of an aspect, but that is also a sextile. So I'm going to discuss these 3 aspects to this eclipse. So let's start with the Sun-Saturn conjunction. We have to start with the Sun. Saturn is opposing it and it's a very tight orb. Now, I discussed Sun and Saturn conjunction in 2 previous videos before this one. So if you're really interested to understand that dynamic, I encourage you to go watch those videos. But just briefly right now. So Saturn, as usual, the planet of reality and reality, just making us have a realization of reality, and the planet that brings about the necessity of understanding how we're accountable for our actions is coming into play right now. So what is Saturn going to do here? Saturn is going to be the reality revealer in terms of the consequences of our habits and our actions. in taking on implementing those habits and those routines every day. So if you have, let's say, very not a very good eating nutritional habits, you might see some outcome of this. You use substances, for example, you might see some outcomes of this. This is what Saturn would love to reveal right now, to show us what it is that is no longer working and doesn't have an application. And in fact, it's something that is harmful and needs to be purified and cleared out of the way. And another way, in the sign of Pisces, we can go into the more imaginative realm, into the more idealized aspects of our thoughts and feelings. And Saturn sitting in the sign of Pisces also. So not only is showing us things that are happening in Virgo in terms of routines and habits and in that practical engagement that we have in life, but it might also reveal to us how our imagination of ourself, because the sun is also conjunct here, how those things are hindering or making our existence, our tangible existence, impure. It's like showing us how the waters of our emotions and inner landscape might be contaminated. So Saturn's kind of coming forth to show us how we need to be responsible, what responsibility at this point of life means, how we are accountable, and how we must implement the daily work that we do, how we engage with life in a very practical and a tangible way. So let's say you have this in the second house and the eighth house axis, right? So it's going to tell you something about these matters through the financial aspect of life. And the fourth and the 10th axis, the relationship between family and our career, how things are unfolding there, those routines, those habits. So you have a workaholic kind of a person. Saturn's going to show you what the consequences of that are. Are you sacrificing too much for your family and you've given up on your health and you don't really have a healthy self routine because you're giving all your attention and your affection to other people? Saturn's going to reveal that. So Saturn's intensifying the themes of this axis, which are already, they naturally have a tension point. Saturn's showing the tension point between the Piscean ideals and the tangible results that we are getting or need to be getting in the sign of Virgo. So the planet of negation is going to show us how we have been neglectful, what we've neglected. And this might actually be related because it is in the sign of Pisces. It might spin that whole thing of the practical aspects of life to you have chosen these routines and habits that have zero correspondence to your aspiration, to the dreams that you have had, to the person that you thought that you might become. Like, who the hell have you become? So it's a reality checkpoint considering Saturn in this eclipse. And I was saying that Ketu brings out that subconscious thing. Saturn's going to help it to understand where we've been avoidant. These are very subconscious things that we do. How we self-sabotage, because the sun is also involved here. So Saturn's going to show us where we have failed and are failing. Saturn might also show us, like, how do we sacrifice some of the Virgo themes, they are so necessary for maintaining life, the daily life, the practical work that it requires, like do the laundry, take out the garbage, pay your bills on time. Very practical. So Saturn's going to show us where we've been neglectful because we have these ideals of how things ought to be, like the sign of Pisces. So Saturn's not going to let us be comfortable with brushing away practicality and that problem solving, the daily engagement that we need to have with life because we have some fantasy in our head in terms of who we think we should be, ought to be, that any kind of sense of entitlement that might be there because the sun is sitting there. That self-entitlement. Yeah, Saturn's trying to direct our ways to more structured actions that can have practical real-life applications. So Saturn is kind of like a dream killer at the moment, and it's showing us where we've been neglectful with our responsibilities to daily life, where we have betrayed daily life, and Saturn really dislikes that. So Saturn's gonna bring a certain amount of pain, because that's what Saturn does, but it is the means to cut through the BS and all the mental clutter and all the subconscious shadow points that are justifying everything. Saturn's just going to reveal reality in its full spectrum of harshness so that we see it and we cannot mistake it for anything else. And considering just briefly just the fact that the sun, which represents the self, our self-confidence, things of that nature coming in with Saturn. So it's going to play its themes out through the self and how we understand things. The sun can also represent parental figures, especially this conjunction of Saturn and Sun. And you know, Sun and Saturn, when they made that exact conjunction, the Kazemi of Saturn, that's a moment of death and rebirth for Saturn. So in a lot of ways, Saturn has also come to an understand what the new reality of things are. And once when Saturn knows, Saturn's going to try to implement and is getting its first run through this eclipse, which is very intense. So now if we take Mars into consideration in the sign of Cancer, Mars is making an aspect, a trine aspect to Sun and Saturn, and it's sextiling the Virgo eclipse. So just by the virtue, I mean, as I was saying, the degrees are a little bit looser, but is in the superior position to the eclipse and to Saturn and Sun. So Mars does have something to say here. And Mars is bringing a particular kind of an emotional intensity to this eclipse. It's penetrative, but it's also very personal because it's operating from that emotional, internal aspect of ourselves. And you know, because Mars is debilitated in the sign of Cancer, it's not able to be very action-oriented and be its usual logical self of this is how you get from point A to B. So it's not like a direct force that can enact and respond to its instincts and just get things moving. It generally has to become more protective when Mars is in the sign of Cancer. So it's like having a bruise and then you just keep pressing on it and it really hurts, but it makes you aware that you have an injury, you're feeling it. But because this is a harmonious aspect, because we're talking about a sextile and a trine, Mars is creating some sort of an outlet for the emotional intensity that can come from this eclipse. So this Mars aspect is making us acutely aware of our security paradigms, what we need to do to feel better, because we're feeling it deeply with this aspect. And you know, to change your habits in life, it's like you have to come to a very deep realization about something. Like people who use substances, for example, when they have that moment of, let's call it awakening, of, wow, this is damaging my health, this is damaging my family. That habit can literally be put aside in an instant when there's an emotional intensity to it. And I would say the way that this Mars positioning is helping that eclipse, because that eclipse is showing us the kind of habits and routines that we need to let go of. That emotional components that's coming out of Mars is like leaving its imprint so deep within us that we also have this urge and this drive now to change certain things. So I see that trine aspect of it and that sextile aspect of it, the beneficial aspect of it, in terms of viscerally understanding that change is necessary. And that's a good thing, because that's how we actually change things. When it appeals to us on a very emotional and a personal level. So now let's go to Uranus in Taurus, which is at the exact same degree as this eclipse. And it's a sextile to this lunar eclipse, which is kind of funny because the sign of Virgo as an earth sign has stability in it. So does the sign of Taurus. And then we got these destabilizing, rebellious, non-conforming kind of a planet, Uranus, in there, interacting with the eclipse too. So no matter how we flip this coin, Uranus is going to bring forth some disruptive factor because it's about change and upheaval. But then when we look at the eclipses, they are demanding severe change and upheaval. So in some way, we can say that this Uranus aspect is accommodating the eclipse, which might be very uncomfortable for us personally, but in the long run of life, when this axis is done with everything that it's trying to do, it was a good thing that happened because it initiated that transformative process. It's almost as if Uranus is liberating us from those practical ways that we are tied and attached to our lives. And it might bring this by creating some feeling of not feeling settled in our material paradigm of life. And what does Virgo do when that happens? It just goes into an over-analysis. But Virgo is smart. Virgo is intelligent. So even this can help us recognize how we can attend to these earthly matters that we're entangled with. I mean, we have to, because we're these material beings in this material world, and that's what we need to actually stay alive. So maybe the shifts that Uranus is also creating and the intelligence of Virgo, we're going to figure out how to set new routines, habits, and ways of being and doing things. A new kind of an understanding coming out of that box of just doing the same things every day over and over. So in some ways, Uranus is forcing a breakthrough. It's not just like a chaotic shakeup here, considering that it's a beneficial kind of an aspect. And when things get shook in our lives, something happens in the brain. If we can pass that moment of absolute stress and its tension, that breaking point is freeing a lot of different components that are generally not relational in our mind to come into relation. And that's how we have a new synthesis. That's how we are innovative. We have eureka moments. We become creative. And, we can look at Uranus here in terms of it's trying to revolutionize how we conduct ourselves in our daily lives and how we engage with the material components of it. I feel like both Uranus and Mars so far are accelerating that message or that way that the eclipse is trying to bring forth. Whereas Saturn and Sun, or the Sun's giving us the vision to see what needs to be changed. Saturn's being so consequential at the moment that we're seeing the consequences of how we do things. So we have instincts like Mars, and we have fluxes and changes that get our attention. All of it is just making this eclipse a lot more intense. And I think I like to end the video here. Just want to be brief because I'm going to come back to talk about the Aries eclipse, and we'll be touching on this eclipse and the past eclipses. So just want to wrap this up right now. And I would say the way to look at any kind of a transit or even planets in our birth chart is to see them as a person or a thing that's posing some sort of a question to us. And I feel the questions that this eclipse would be asking us is like, what have you been avoiding? What are some of the illusions that you have and things that you just keep resisting and you don't want to confront? Things that are actually real in your life. It's asking, what of your daily life, your work life, your health, how you make yourself of service, whichever house that is sitting in, the themes of that house and people pertaining to it. It's asking us, how does all of this stuff need refinements? How is it subpar? How can you recategorize it, reorganize it? And then what kind of practical steps can you take every day to move forward in correspondence, let's say, to your ideal, which is in Pisces, and what actually needs to be done in real life? It's asking us like, what about all of the habits that you have, all of the routines that you have? How are they constructive? What are they actually doing for you? How are they benefiting you? How are they hindering you? So engaging with planets through a question, it becomes less shocking when we see what they're trying to do. It's like a kind of a preparation for a test almost. So you can formulate your own questions in terms of how you understand the sign of Virgo and Pisces in your chart, and considering what the eclipses are about and what kind of aspects are coming in. One thing that's safe to say that this eclipse is really, really blocking our sense of escapism and wanting to escape. And it's not going to be about passive reflection because it's in the sign of Virgo, which is a very tangible, earthy sign. So in a lot of ways, it's forcing us to analyze how we are actually showing up in the material world as these material beings, how we engage with it. What are the consequences for our environments? What is the consequence of the environments that we're in on us? And then how do we need to carve new pathways to do things, to have new routines, to have new habits? And then I would say the feeling that this eclipse is going to bring, like if you're not a willing participant, if you're not in the flow to change and to have these transformations and to do things differently, it's like that saying goes, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me 3 times, then I am the fool. Like there are consequences in figuring out new pathways and how to engage. And when you think about the material realm, the earthly realm, we're talking about what constitutes as reality for human beings. So this is kind of like a wake-up moment to our reality. It's kind of taking us through a fast forward motion or a fast moving reflection of our past, its structures, its routines, and its habits, all kinds of things that defined our life and our sense of self up to this moment. And then it's showing us like this stuff is not working. Like you're just keep repeating the same thing and is not giving you any kind of a healthy, clean outcome in life. And the ways that we have been trying to avoid things since that first eclipse in September, this eclipse will set the stage up in a way that avoidance will not be part of this game. Practical adjustments are going to have to be made. So I'm going to leave this video off here for now. And I have made a video with Darren Starr, and we had a great time discussing Venus from all things. We talked more about Venus because it's a very complex transit in 2025, is retrograde cycle and all of the conjunctions that it makes. And yeah, we talked about that. So that'll be coming up next. And after that, we'll be moving on to another transit of March 2025. And I'm also in the process of editing Sun in the ninth house. So stay tuned for that one. And that's it for now. Much love. Till next time.